Some days ago, THS, the developer of Lossless Scaling, sent me an email and asked me if I wanted to review the latest version of Lossless Scaling, and I was like, no, thank you. Of course I said yes, that's why I'm making this video, and I'm actually reviewing the Lossless Scaling 2.11. And according to the developer, the two main things that the 2.11 version brings is the first one is that it can quadruple your frame rates, meaning that you can go from 30 to 120, 60 to, let's say, 240, which is actually what the developer recommends, not below 60 the minimum. And the second thing is that it now brings initial support for G-Sync. While it previously worked with VRR, but especially with FreeSync, it didn't work very well with G-Sync. It now works with G-Sync properly, and well, I tested it before making this video, of course, and VRR and G-Sync and V-Sync are very, very important in order to maintain a very, very smooth experience. Basically the same smooth experience that you get with today's sponsor.
GVG Mode!
Bringing you lots of software deals like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2019 or 2021 with a new Windows 11 design, and for all of these you can use my SKG discount code for 30% off, getting a Windows 11 serial key for $22 and a Windows 10 one for only $15. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. Now on the software side we have Lossless Scaling 2.11 and I'm running administrator mode because with the tutorial that I saw online I was able to make Lossless Scaling, or in this case OBS, capture lossless scaling even with overlay and so on. But as soon as I disabled lossless scaling inside the game, the image would just stutter till I enabled lossless scaling once again. So it wasn't optimal, but I finally found it, and all you have to do is actually go to OBS and just kind of create two scenes. One scene for the display capture and one scene for lossless scaling, kind of separated. I believe that I can show you here. So one for the desktop, another one for the lossless scaling. Now as for the software, 2.11, and we have at least for the RTX 4000 series and RX 7000 series, we have lossless scaling frame generation 2.3. I believe that depending on your card it might change. For some older generation cards, lossless scaling frame generation might be at version 2.2.1 or something like that, so don't worry if it shows like that. We have performance mode, and like I told you before about the G-Sync, here it is, G-Sync support. So that's a thing that we have right now. Before we just had VRR support, and according to the developer it wasn't working properly with G-Sync before. It was working with FreeSync somehow, even with VRR disabled, but not with G-Sync. But now it works. But well, nothing better than actually show you in-game how it is working. And by the way, sorry for the stuttery, the frame timeline that you see here kind of stuttering a lot. That's not happening when I'm usually just gaming. It happens though when I'm recording with OBS. It doesn't happen when I record with the Nvidia software. It just has a flat line, but somehow with OBS and an Nvidia card this happens. Not with AMD. AMD works fine here, but with Nvidia, especially in this game, it does happen, and I don't really know why. So once again, the frame time pacing that you see here is not normal. It happens because I'm recording with OBS. Now we have frame generation, lossless frame generation working at 2 times, I believe. So yeah, let's try it at 2 times firstly. So Ctrl-Alt+S, which is a shortcut to enable lossless frame generation, lossless scaling frame generation. Bam! Then we change to lossless scaling scene. And then we go from 90 something to 70 something, so we lose a lot of FPS, a lot of base FPS. We went basically from 90 to 70 something base FPS, but the end FPS will be 140 something, meaning that the overall fluidity will be much better because we are actually having 140 something hertz in terms of refresh rate versus 90 hertz that we had before. And in terms of visual artifacts, we actually don't have many. Besides the frame timeline, if you look at MS Afterburner overlay, you can see that if I move it, if I move it like this, the frame pacing has kind of, well, it is kind of artifacting, but the general quality is pretty good. Even if we go here, let's change scene a bit, and it works well even at 2 times, of course. So from 60 something to 130, and yeah, let's just use scene pass. If I go here, well, smoother. If I disable, I mean, it is not as smooth because, of course, we are now hovering around the 80 Hz, 90 Hz, and in this case scenario, yeah, it feels like it lacks information because we were using 130 before. Once again, as soon as I enable once again, bam, I enable once again lossless scaling, and it looks much better. Even the frame pacing is better somehow, but yeah, I guess it is what it is, 130, and it works much better and feels much better. The 3 times, well, aren't usually aimed at these base frames, so they are aimed for higher refresh rate monitors. And once again, I have the 240 Hz monitor where I will test with an AMD card with an RX 6750 XT. I will test the 4 times as well. We're running 80 something FPS. As soon as we enable lossless scaling, bam, we go to 62 base 160. Logically, this would be like 50 something to reach the 160 mark, but in this case we have 67 base and 160, which is my monitor's maximum refresh rate. But since we are having more base frames, it doesn't feel like it is connected, and it somehow kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but it kind of stutters. The 2 times with lower frames overall, like 140, just felt better. But it does work, and in terms of artifacts, it isn't actually that bad, and G-Sync works as well, which is actually quite nice. So before we're testing Hellblade 2, now we're testing Nobody Wants to Die, which is kind of an unoptimized title, I mean, using Unreal Engine 5, and even with an RTX 4080 Super at 1440p, we're still getting like 60 FPS without upscaling. This is actually how bad it is. 2 times mode, I activate lossless scaling from 55 base, 57. From 57 base, we go from 57 to 48, so we lose around 10 FPS, more or less 10 FPS. And at the same time, we double it to 96, 95, 96. So, yeah, in terms of smoothness, it is actually quite good, actually. Quite good, at least in the scene, it is actually quite good. And by the way, of course, this is just one scene. I'm playing this, but I can tell you that it is working perfectly in terms of variable refresh rate. In this case, G-Sync, it is working properly, and it definitely feels much better than the base frames that we were having. For example, let's say once again disable lossless scaling, and we're having 56. Yeah, and it feels like it's crashing. As soon as I enable lossless scaling, yeah, much smoother. Let's try, for example, the 3 times mode. We go from 57 base to 45, so around the same. We just lost like 2 FPS more compared to the 2 times, and now we go up to 135. And yeah, it is even smoother. Now it can reach a point where the added motion blur from the frame generation, because if you are using frame generation, you should disable motion blur inside the game, and the added motion blur may actually give you like motion sickness or something like that. But so far, only when I move real fast is when I have artifacts. If I'm moving, well, normally, yeah, we have the motion blur, but that's about it, and most times it just looks very well. But well, let's try in the other computer with a 240 Hz monitor and the RX 6750 XT.
A few moments later.
So as you saw, we're running on this computer that I've put purposely, yes, here, in order to test this, to kind of have a mid-tier CPU running the same lossless scaling in order to see how it performs, because of course we were using a high tier card like the 4080 Super. Now we're using a mid tier card from AMD, the RX 6750 XT, which is still a vastly used card, especially since it is from the 6000 series, that it is pretty inexpensive now and still perform pretty well. And even in here, 2.11 running in administrator because of the recording that I told you before, we still have lossless scaling frame generation 2.3, and we're running the 2 times mode. So let's start with the 2 times mode with Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, yeah. So as you know, this game is quite heavy, and in this case we're running, let me see, oh my bad, we're running 1080p, but we can run 1440p, let's run 1440p, but let's say with TSR to, let's say, 67%. Basically upscaling quality mode, TSR, using the Unreal Engine 5 temporal upscaler, and it just doesn't look that good. I guess we can try using, let's say, 75 maybe it looks better. And we're already running the medium settings, by the way. We can, although, increase the texture size because we do have 12 gigabytes, and it looks considerably better now. So we have 64, 60 something base frames, which is not that good, but I mean, it's Hellblade 2, of course it is heavy. Now, as soon as we enable lossless scaling, bam, 55, well, we decrease a bit, like 10, 12 FPS, depends on the scene, of course, but we go from 50 to 99 FPS, and it definitely feels much smoother. But if you look at around Senua's hair, we can see that we do have a lot of artifacting, because the artifacting is already there with the usual anti-aliasing. It is there already, and the frame generation just kind of intensifies it. But depending on the scene, well, you won't see any kind of issue. For example, here, since the colors blind out much better, you won't see any issue, and the same applies to these scenes. But as soon as you go, for example, to around here, on the whiter scenes, on the whiter background scenes, yeah, it happens. But it isn't distracting by any means, and in terms of input latency, since we're using the 2 times only, it isn't bad by any means at all. Now we can go and try, for example, the 3 times mode, since we have a 240Hz monitor, 3 times mode, and then we go from 50, let's say, 50 base frames to 35. That's a big impact for triple the frame rates. Basically, we have around the same results, only a bit more final FPS, but way lower base FPS, and those way lower base FPS will give you less visual fidelity, because the software has less information to work with. In terms of overall smoothness, of course it is much smoother, because it has more frames, meaning that the refresh rate is also higher, meaning that you have more smoothness, of course. But in terms of visual artifacts, it isn't as good, because we have a lower base frame rate. Although we do have the performance mode, so we can just enable the performance mode, and the FPS drop from frame generation will be less. The quality won't be as good, but at the same time, yeah, let's see, instead of going, now we have 60, yeah, the bikes. Instead of 60, 58, 57, we enable it, and we drop to 45. Before we drop to 30 something, which is a lot, but with the 3 times with performance mode, we only drop to 44, and now the final FPS are 130, which is considerably higher than before. And yeah, the latency is far from bad, actually. Far from bad. It is noticeable, but far from bad, and the smoothness is just much better. In terms of visual artifacts in this scene, we don't have many. If we look at the OSD, MS Afterburner OSD, you can see that the frame timeline is still having visual glitches. But usually, with a base frame of 46, for a base frame of 46, it is actually working considerably well. I mean, frame generation software is meant to be used, at least for now, in today's gaming. It is meant to be used with 60 frames, 60 base frames or more. And having lossless scaling frame generation working this good, with only 40 something, 50, it is actually an achievement, at least here. But yeah, we still have some visual artifacts here and there, and I can notice that, for example, in some scenes when I'm moving fast. For example, here, if I move fast, if you look at Senua's hand, you can see that there are some artifacts there, but I mean, if you are looking at it. Finally, the 4 times mode, and of course we have to try it in performance mode, otherwise the overall performance will just be crap, the base frames will just be too low. And now we have 56 as we had before. Lossless scaling enable, Ctrl Alt plus S to enable it, bam. And now we drop to 40, which is, well, of course, considerably lower, sorry, but at the same time we have 160, and yeah, it is smoother. I can tell the difference. It is smoother than 130, even with such lower base frames and quadrupling the frame rates. I mean, even in terms of latency, it is there, definitely there, but it isn't that bad for single-player games. It would be massively a disgrace for let's say, people that were playing competitive games, of course, but for single-player games like Hellblade, it is more than fine, and you have 4 times the FPS. I mean, it's just insane. But well, of course, one game alone doesn't tell the whole story. Even 2 games or 3 games aren't enough to do a perfect analysis, but what I'm trying to do here is not an analysis, it's just me showing you how it performs in different types of games. And I'm running now PalWorld, and as you see, we're running with a base frame of 80, around that, which is, once again, far from bad. 80 frames. As soon as we enable the 2 times lossless scaling frame generation, 2 times, we go there, bam, and we go from 80 to 70, which is not that bad, 80 something, so we lost around 10-15 FPS, but at the same time it doubled the frames to 130 something, 140. So from 80 something base frames to 140 final frames, sorry. And in terms of quality, yeah, I mean, yeah, it works fine. It works fine, at least with 70 something base frames, it works very well. The latency is not bad by any means, it works very well, and these frame spikes that you're seeing here are most likely due to recording here and there, or loading some parts, because I actually did a clean driver installation, so shaders are still loading. But overall, I mean, even moving the camera, the quality is insanely good. Insanely good for 75 base frames, going up to 160, and we have such a smoother experience, and that happens due to the doubled frames of the frame generation. Much better, definitely. Not even comparable to the base experience. Once again, let's disable it. And now we have 70 something. Yeah, and now it feels like it's crashing because it's lacking information. It has like not half, but almost half the frames, so, and half the refresh rate, so it does make the difference. As soon as I enable lossless scaling once again, bam, we go to 130, 140, and yeah, much smoother, much better. Now let's try, let's try the 3 times now. We have 80, 80 something. Now let's enable it. We went from 83 to 60, which is a big decrease. It seems that the older generation cards work slightly okay with the 2 times, but as soon as you go to 3 times and 4 times, the performance is just far from ideal. But still, we go from 60 to 180, which is not bad. We do have a bit more visual artifacts because the base frame rate is way lower compared to what we had before, and 60 base frames aren't really enough for most case scenarios, especially if you are going to 3 times the frame rate that you're having. But still, it works fine. It's not a bad experience, and we're now having 180 FPS, around that 170, 180, and that means that the refresh rate of this panel is also around 180, 170, which delivers a much smoother experience. It is not bad. Now let's try, for example, let's try the 4 times, but with performance mode, since this card has a big performance decrease without the performance mode. Now, from 80 with the performance mode, from 80 to 60, even with the performance mode, we go from 80 to 60, and we go from 60 something 65, 62, 63 to 250, which goes actually above my monitor's refresh rate. And with my previous monitor with G-Sync, it was actually locking the frames to a maximum, and here it seems that it isn't. Maybe I need to lock the frames to 60 in order to maintain it at 240. Now I'm locking it to 60, and well, smooth it is. It is definitely smooth. That much I can tell you. It feels silky smooth like a baby's butt. And the artifacts aren't bad actually in this game. At least in this game it works pretty well. Now, one thing that I notice in this game is that when I have my hat on, yeah, for example, the tip of the hat, you can see that it kind of disappears when you're moving, and that's a visual artifact from frame generation. It does happen. And if you see around the hat as well, it doesn't work as well, or even around the character, you can see, for example, the bow, you can see that it does have some visual artifacts here and there, but overall it isn't that bad actually. If I disable the hat, you won't be able to look at it properly, and unless you're really looking at it, or if you're moving the camera really fast, yeah, you won't notice any visual artifacts. If you're playing like this, for example, so when you're moving the crossbow fast enough, you can see the tips of the crossbow kind of fading away as well, and that's because of the visual artifacts of the frame generation. But anything besides that and going to the normal gameplay scenarios, let's say, especially if you're playing far away from the monitor like this, you won't be really able to notice anything besides those small details and maybe the bottom of the monitor where you can see that it does artifact a bit. So for this scenario, the 4 times aren't really the thing, let's say that, but they work decently. Even they work much better than I thought they would. I thought that I would be having way more artifacts with the 4 times, but even the 4 times works decently well. And if you're aiming for these frames, if you're using, let's say, 4 times, but instead of that you're using, let's say, the non-performance mode, or if you're using the 3 times non-performance or the 2 times non-performance, it will work perfectly. And I mean, you can use it in basically any game, so that's crazy. And you can even watch videos like mine with lossless scaling as well, kind of doing 2, 3 or 4 times your video frame rate. So yeah. And well guys, that's all for this video. Thank you very much for watching. By the way, I'll be doing really soon a tutorial on, well, at least a more detailed tutorial on how to record, how to properly record lossless scaling frame generation with OBS, showing you how to switch in between scenes, how to create properly the scene that will hook to the lossless scaling frame generation inputted frames. I'm really slow today, but yeah. At least so far, this version works very well with the 2.11, with G-Sync, and now the 4 times. Well, the 4 times frame generation, which in some case scenarios might become handy, but in some others, yeah, the input latency is just too much and the overall quality just doesn't justify as well. You're much better just using the 2 times with a slightly higher base frame rate. So yeah, unless you have a 360Hz monitor. If you have a 360 or 480Hz monitor, then the 4 times might become handy because you can use up to 80 base frames in order to then quadruple the frames to 360 or even more if you have a 480Hz monitor. But besides that, if you're having a casual 160 like I do, or even 240Hz, you're way better with the 3 times mode compared to the 4 times mode, 2 times or 3 times mode, which actually has way less visual artifacts because once again it is just tripling the frame rates instead of quadrupling them. So yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video. Leave your comment in the comment section if you actually tested this software with 4 times the frame rates, 3 times, 2 times. Which card did you test it in? If it works properly, if it doesn't, if it works with G-Sync now, just let me know because I really want to know. Thank you very much and see you in the next video, guys. Cheers.